There are many folk tales that are allegorical in nature. Let's see what this one brings up for us. The husband paced up and down outside the bedchamber of their farmhouse and winced each time the wails of his wife giving birth reached his ears. He waited anxiously until silence reigned, heaving a sigh of relief as he heard the sounds of the cries of a newborn infant. He stood outside the door, waiting until the midwife came out, carrying the newborn in her arms, and said to him, "Congratulations, your wife has given birth to a healthy and beautiful girl." The man's face changed and contorted. He stomped out of the room, slamming the door behind him. He had wanted a boy. After all, he was a farmer, and he needed boys to help him with the hard work of maintaining the farm. The next day, when his wife was sleeping, he took the infant and wrapped it in rags and went deep out into the forest, where he laid the bundle under a tree stump, and walking away, leaving the child to her fate. He thought no more about her. The infant slept, but then the pangs of hunger awoke her and she started to cry. The ants were busy with their work. They couldn't help. The birds flying had no milk to give, so they merely flew away. But as she cried, there was someone that heard her cries, and out of the trees came the great grandfather ape. Hearing the infant's cries, he picked her up, cradling her gently, and he knew what to do. He took coconuts from the trees. He pounded the pulp and gave her milk. He made a nest high up in the trees where she would be safe, and he knew what juices to give her that would be agreeable to her. And so she was cared for, and she grew. As she grew, Grandfather Ape taught her the ways of the forest, nurturing in her an honor for the creatures that lived there, teaching her to be fearless in front of those who appeared to be wild. He taught her how to weave, make baskets, to make the utensils that were needed. And so she grew into a beautiful young girl. Grandfather Ape loved to go into the town, and in particular, he enjoyed watching the blacksmiths at their work, using their great bellows to make the fire in the furnace in which they would throw the pieces of metal until they became white hot and could be made into the utensils that were used in the village, the kettles, the pots, the pans, and so on. But one day, Grandfather Ape climbed up to the roof, and he shouted, "You would love to meet my granddaughter." But the sound of the fire of the furnace and the chat between the blacksmiths drowned out his voice, and they didn't hear him, except one apprentice who noticed him up on the roof and even remarked to the others, "Have you seen that great ape sitting up on the roof?" But nobody really cared. The apprentice was very diligent in his work, but he did listen to what Grandfather Ape said. And one day, his curiosity was piqued to the degree that he decided to follow him into the forest. So he followed Grandfather Ape as he made his way, but it was very hard, because sometimes Grandfather Ape swung in the trees, and sometimes he followed a path. But somehow the apprentice was able to keep track of Grandfather Ape, and so he arrived at the place where Grandfather Ape's granddaughter lived, up in the tree. Grandfather Ape called to his granddaughter and said, "Come, we have a guest. Prepare something for him." And his granddaughter said, "No, I've never met a man and I'm afraid." Grandfather Ape said, "I have watched him each day. He is a fine young man. Do not have fear. Prepare something to give him hospitality." So the granddaughter prepared bowls of delicious fresh fruit, which the young apprentice enjoyed, and she soon lost her fear of him, so that they conversed and became friends. Young apprentice loved being in the forest. He enjoyed the sounds. He enjoyed listening to the wisdom of Grandfather Ape, and in particular, he enjoyed the company of this beautiful, simple maiden. Of course, they fell in love, and Grandfather Ape was able to marry them. Now, in the village, after the apprentice had been missing, his family wondered where he was and thought he'd been eaten by wild animals in the forest. But the apprentice, even though he was happy in his abode with his wife and in nature, he missed his family and the village life. So he mentioned to Grandfather Ape that he wanted to return. To the apprentice's great surprise, and his wife, when they came out one day there was a rainbow, which they were able to follow like a bridge over the forest that came down right at the doorstep of the apprentice's family home. Now when his mother came out and saw this rainbow, which ended right on her doorstep, she could not believe her eyes when she saw descending the colors an ape. And as it grew closer, she recognized her son who had been missing. There was a great reunion and celebration as the townspeople came together to enjoy the festivities that came with a wedding. Now the apprentice preferred his life in the forest, so they returned. One day, Grandfather Ape came to them and said, "I must leave you now." They were greatly distressed, but he did indeed disappear. His granddaughter, her heart longing for him, went to find him. And as she went into the forest, she saw his body lying under a great tree. But as she knelt by his side to say her farewells, to her very great surprise, Grandfather Ape's fur turned into seeds, the seeds of all kind that enrich the earth to bring abundance. His limbs became the utensils of life, pots and pans and bowls, spoons. His chest cavity became a great cauldron. His heart was gold, gold in abundance that would keep them in wealth for the rest of their lives. Every part, each part of Grandfather Ape's being became the abundant necessities of life itself. Ever after, as Grandfather Ape's granddaughter used the cauldron, sowed and reaped the seeds, used the spoons to stir her pots, she ever remembered Grandfather Ape and all that she had learned from him. What does Grandfather Ape represent for us in this folk tale? And what is its deep, deep meaning in its allegorical sense? Who is Grandfather Ape for us? What is the deep allegorical meaning of this story? Several weeks ago it was quoted what Divine Mother would often say: you have to know who you are, and you have to know who God is. What could this folk tale have to do with answering this question? Who am I? Who is God?